Chapter 4. Over the banquet table. "Yertil!" cried Bigman at once, with ferocity that stiffened every muscle of his small body. "That dirty cobber!" "Why Yertil?" asked Lucky softly. "You want us to watch our suits, Lucky, remember?" "Of course, and that's exactly what I did." "Sure, he set it up for us. We find a slashed suit, and we think he's a great guy. Then we're cold meat for him next time around. Don't fall for that, Lucky. He's a—" "Now, wait, Bigman, wait. Don't make up your mind so fast. Look at it this way. Yertil said Mindy's had tried to kill him too. Suppose we believe him. Suppose Mindy's had tried to gimmick Yertil's suit and Yertil spotted it in time. Yertil would warn us to watch out for the same trick. Maybe Mindy's did this." "Sans Mars, Lucky. That can't be. This guy Mindy's, he's ladled full of sleeping pills. Before that, he wasn't out of our sight from the minute we got onto this miserable rock." "All right. How do we know Mindy's is asleep and under medication?" said Lucky. "Gardoma says—" began Bigman and fell silent. "Exactly. Gardoma says. We haven't seen Mindy's, though. We only know what Dr. Gardoma said, and Dr. Gardoma is a great friend of Mindy's." "The two of them are in it together," said Bigman with instant conviction. "Jumping comets." Wait, don't you jump so. Great galaxy, Bigman. I'm just trying to straighten out my thoughts, and you take me up on everything." His tone was as disapproving as it ever could be with respect to his small friend. He went on, "Now you've complained a dozen times that I don't tell you everything on my mind until everything's done with. This is why, you blaster-happy nitwit. As soon as I advance a theory, you're off on a charge, all your weapons cocked and ready." "I'm sorry, Lucky," said Bigman. "Go ahead." "All right. Now, Yertil is easy to suspect. Nobody likes him. Even Dr. Prevail doesn't. You saw how he reacted just to the mention of his name. We only met him once, and you dislike him." "I'll say," muttered Bigman. "And while I don't exactly like him either, anyone can slash this suit and hope that suspicion will fall on Yertil if it should happen to be discovered. And it would surely be discovered after it's killed someone, if not before." "I see all that, Lucky." "On the other hand," went Lucky smoothly, "Mindy's has already tried to get rid of me with a blaster. If that were a serious attempt, he doesn't seem the type to do anything as indirect as suit slashing. As for Dr. Gardoma, I don't see him involving himself in the murder of a councilman just out of friendship for Mindy's." "Then what's the decision?" cried Bigman impatiently. "There isn't any so far," said Lucky, "except maybe that we go to sleep." He turned down the bed sheets and stepped into the washroom. Bigman looked after him and shrugged his shoulders. Scott Mindy's was sitting up in bed when Lucky and Bigman entered his quarters the next morning. He was pale and looked tired. "Hello," he said. "Carl Gardoma told me what happened. You don't know how sorry I am." Lucky passed it off with a shrug. "How do you feel?" "Wrung out, but all right if you know what I mean. I'll be at the dinner party old Prevail is giving tonight." "Is that wise?" "I won't leave Yertil there holding the fort," said Mindy's, hatred suddenly flooding his face with momentary color. "Telling everyone I'm crazy, or Dr. Prevail either, for that matter." "Dr. Prevail doubts your sanity?" asked Lucky softly. "Well, look, Starr, I've been scouting the Sunside in a small rocket scooter ever since the accident started getting bad. I had to do it. It's my project. Twice now I've seen something." Mindy's paused, and Lucky prodded him. "Seen what, Dr. Mindy's?" "I wish I could say for sure. I saw it only from a distance each time. Something moving. Something that looked human. Something in a spacesuit. Not one of our INSO suits, our special insulated jobs, you know. It looked more like an ordinary spacesuit. Ordinary metal, you know." "Did you try to get closer?" "Yes, and I lost it. And the photograph showed nothing either. Just spots of light and dark that might have been something or nothing. But it was something all right. Something that moved under the sun as though it didn't care a thing for the heat and radiation. It would even stand still in the sun for minutes at a time. That's what got me." "Is that strange? Standing still, I mean." Mindy's laughed shortly. "On this Mercury sunside? Sure it is. Nobody stands still. Insulated suit and all, you go about your business as fast as you can and get out from under as fast as you can. This near the Terminator, the heat isn't so bad. It's the radiation, though. It's just good practice to take as little of it as possible. The INSO suits aren't complete protection against gamma rays. If you must stand still, you move into the shade of a rock." "What's your explanation of it all?" Mindy's voice fell to an almost shamed whisper. "I don't think it's a man." "You're not going to say it's a two-legged ghost, are you?" said Bigman suddenly before Lucky could nudge him into silence. But Mindy's only shook his head. Did I use that phrase on the surface? I seem to remember. No, I think it's a Mercurian. What? Cried Bigman, sounding as though he thought that were worse. How else could it endure the sun's radiation and heat so? Why would it need a spacesuit, then? Asked Lucky. I don't know. Mindy's eyes flashed, and a restless wildness settled upon them. But something. When I got back to the dome, every man and every suit could be accounted for each time. Dr. Brevale won't authorize an expedition to make a real search. He says we're not equipped for it. Have you told him what you told me? He thinks I'm crazy. I'm sure of it. He thinks I'm seeing reflection and building men out of them in my imagination. But that's not so, Starr. Lucky said, Have you contacted the Council of Science? How can I? Dr. Brevale won't back me. Yurchiel would say I was mad, and they would listen to him. Who would listen to me? I would, said Lucky. Mindy sat up in bed with a jerk. His hand shot out as though it were ready to grasp the other's sleeves, but then held back. He said in a choked voice, Then you'll investigate it? In my way, promised Lucky. I will. The others were already at the banquet table that evening when Lucky and Bigman arrived. Above the hum of greeting that rose as they entered and the beginning of the introductions, there were obvious signs that the gathering was not entirely a pleasant one. Dr. Brevale sat at the head of the table, his thin lips set and his sunken cheeks quivering, the picture of dignity maintained under difficulty. At his left was the broad-shouldered figure of Yurchiel, lounging back in his chair, thick fingers playing delicately with the rim of a drinking glass. Toward the foot of the table was Scott Mindes, looking painfully young and tired as he stared with angry frustration at Yurchiel. Next to him was Dr. Gardoma, watching with an anxious and thoughtful eye, as though ready to interfere in case Mindes grew rash. The remaining seats, except for 2 empty ones at Dr. Brevale's right, were occupied by several of the senior men of the observatory. One in particular, Hanley Cook, seemed second in command at the dome, leaned his tall, lean body forward, and took Lucky's hand firmly in his own. Lucky and Bigman took their seats, and the salads were served. Yurchiel said at once in a harsh voice that effectively took over the conversation, We were wondering, just before you came in, whether young Mindes ought not to tell you of the great wonders in store for Earth as a result of his experiments. No such thing, snapped Mindes, and I'll do my own talking if you don't mind. Oh, come on, Scott, said Yurchiel, grinning broadly. Don't be bashful. Well then, look here, I'll tell the man. Gardoma's hand fell, as though by accident, on Mindy's shoulder, and the young engineer swallowed a cry of indignation and remained silent. Yurchiel said, Now I warn you, Starr, this is going to be good. Lucky interrupted. I know something of the experiments. The grand result of an air-conditioned planet is quite possible, I think. Yurchiel scowled. Is that so? Glad you're an optimist. Poor Scott can't even make the pilot experiment work. Or at least he says he can't, don't you, Scott? Mindes half rose, but again Dr. Gardoma's hand was on his shoulder. Bigman's eyes traveled from speaker to speaker, resting on Yurchiel with black distaste. He said nothing. The arrival of the main course stopped the conversation momentarily, and Dr. Brevale tried desperately to turn it into a less explosive channels. For a while he succeeded, but then Yurchiel, with the last of his helping of roast beef impaled on his fork, leaned toward Lucky and said, So, you go for the project Mindes is running, do you? I think it's a reasonable one. You have to think that, being a member of the Council of Science, what if I told you that the experiments here were phony? They could be run on Earth for 1% of the cost. The Council were only interested enough of the taxpayers' money to save a little of it. What would you say if I told you that? The same thing I would say if you told me anything at all, retorted Lucky composedly. I would say, Mr. Yurchiel, that the chances are that you are lying. It's your greatest talent, I believe. And, I believe, pleasure. Instantly a great silence fell upon the banqueters, even on Yurchiel. His thick cheeks seemed to sag in surprise and his eyes to bulge. With sudden passion he leaned directly across Dr. Brevale's plate, rising from his seat and bringing his right hand down hard and flat, just short of Lucky's platter. No council lackey, he began in a roar, and as he did that, Bigman moved too. No eye at the table saw the details of that move, since it flashed with the speed of a striking snake, but Yurtiel's roar ended in a shout of dismay. Yurtiel's hand, which had come down with such hard finality, now showed the carved metallic haft of a force knife growing out of it. Dr. Prevail scraped his chair back suddenly, and there was a cry or an exclamation from every man there but Bigman himself. Even Lucky seemed startled. Bigman's tenor rose in delight. "Spread your fingers, you tub of mineral oil. Spread 'em and then grease 'em back down into your seat." Yurtiel stared at his small tormentor without understanding for a moment, and then very slowly spread his fingers. His hand was not hurt, not a sliver of skin had been removed. The force knife stood quivering in the hard plastic tabletop, an inch of its wavering luminescent force blade, it wasn't matter, merely a thin field of immaterial force, in sight. The knife had entered the table, working its way neatly and unerringly between the second and third finger of Yurtiel's hand. Yurtiel snatched his hand away as though it were suddenly in flames. Bigman crowed for delight and said, "And next time you reach a hand in Lucky's direction or in mine, you cobber, I'll chop it right off. What would you say if I told you that? And whatever you say it politely." He reached out for the force knife, deactivating the blade as he seized the haft and returned it to its inconspicuous holder on his belt. Lucky said with a light frown, "I wasn't aware that my friend was armed. I'm sorry. Sure, he's sorry for having disturbed the meal, but I believe Mr. Yurtiel may take this incident to heart." Someone laughed, and there was a tight smile on Mindy's face. Yurtiel looked with hot eyes from face to face. He said, "I won't forget this treatment. It's obvious to me that the senator is receiving little cooperation, and he'll hear of that. And meanwhile I'm staying right here." He folded his arms as if daring anyone to make him leave. Little by little, the conversation grew general. Lucky said to Dr. Prevail, "You know, sir, it seems to me that your face is familiar." "Is it?" The astronomer smiled in strained fashion. "I don't think I've ever met you before." "Well, were you ever on Ceres?" "Ceres?" The old astronomer looked at Lucky with some surprise. He had obviously not yet recovered from the force knife episode. "The largest observatory in the solar system is on that asteroid. I worked there as a young man, and I frequently visit it even now." "Then I wonder if I didn't perhaps see you there." Lucky couldn't help thinking as he spoke of those exciting days when the chase was on for Captain Anton and the pirates who were making their lair in the asteroids, and particularly the day when the pirate ships raided the very heart of Council territory, onto the surface of Ceres itself, winning out temporarily by the very daring of the undertaking. But Dr. Prevail was shaking his head in gentle good humor. "I would have been certain, sir, had I had the pleasure of seeing you there. I am sure I did not." "Too bad," said Lucky. "The loss is mine, I assure you, but then it was my season for loss. As a result of an intestinal ailment, I missed all the excitement in connection with the pirate raid. I only knew of it through the conversations I overheard among my nurses." Dr. Prevail looked about the table now, his good humor restored. The dessert was being served by a mechanical tray carrier. He said, "Gentlemen, there's been some discussion of Project Light." He paused to smile benignly, then went on, "It isn't exactly a happy subject under the circumstances, but I've been thinking a good deal about the accidents that have disturbed so many of us. It seems it would be a good time for me to give you all my thoughts on the matter. After all, Dr. Mindy's is here. We've had a good meal, and finally I have something interesting to say." Yurtiel broke a long silence to ask grimly, "You, Dr. Prevail?" The astronomer said mildly, "Why not? I've had interesting things to say many times in my life, and I will say what's on my mind now." There was a sudden gravity about him. "I believe I know the whole truth, the exact truth. I know who is causing destruction in connection with Project Light, and why."